Turn to Revelation chapter 18. I get to do double editorializing this morning, so that works out pretty good. Revelation chapter 18, a picture of God's judgment upon Babylon. Babylon is just basically worldliness. There's two cities of Revelation, Jerusalem and Babylon. And Jerusalem being the church and Babylon being everything in the world. And I wanted to talk just a little bit, this picture of the collapse of Babylon, really at Jesus' second coming. But in verse 11, Revelation 18, I want to talk about it before it collapses. Revelation 18:11, and where merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. And it goes through and lists all these things, even slaves and human lives are for sale. In verse 15, the merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and mourning. Woe, woe, the great city, she who was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones and pearls. 1 hour, such great wealth has been laid waste. And every shipmaster and every passenger and every sailor, and as many as who make their living by the sea, stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like the great city? So, merchants of the earth is, what I'm thinking about. And I want to talk about market share, okay? Now, market share is kind of an economic term. Mr. Hoffman knows exactly what we're talking about, market share. Because, to initially get into the market, what you're after is a market share. Might be 2%, might be 4%, whatever it is. See, and then once you get your wedge in there, then your goal is to expand your market share. Okay, and that's legitimate business. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to just realize that that's part of the landscape. And but it's not just businesses. It's everything that's in your life that's trying to increase its market share. Met with a guy here the other day, and he's a coach for the Bozeman Bucks baseball. That's basically high school level. And he's pretty excited because they're expanding baseball down into the grade school level. And that's going to be more people in the feeder line for the Bozeman Bucks baseball team. All right. And again, you have to understand that's part of the landscape. But the Christians got to recognize, that everybody out there is going for market share and part of your time and part of your interest. And so, if a company, for example, is fairly aggressive, innovative, and energetic, and they're in there, and they're competing against a company that's kind of in the doldrums, the guys are, they're just riding on past productivity, what's eventually going to happen? Well, the young aggressive guys are going to expand their market share, and they're going to take it away from the companies that didn't. Good example, on North 7th, there used to be a big store there called Kmart. And at one point, S.S. Kresge was one of the largest corporations in the U.S. Okay? But, see, the company didn't pay attention. And down the street, then somebody called Walmart came in. And how long did it take for them to put S.S. Kresge and Walmart out of business, or Kmart out of business? Didn't take long. See, now, what I want to do, though, is to apply this to our personal lives. Okay? God, how much of our lives does God want? Well, he wants 100%. But there's, we even have to break that 100% up into sectors where, okay, person's got to make a living, right? So that's going to be at least 16 hours a day, to get out there and make a living. And by the time you do housework and chores and everything, you're going to get 4 hours of sleep per night. That'll work out pretty good. The point being that, there's sectors of your life you actually have to pay attention to, and you have to work on it. Now, one of the sectors of your life is actual time in the Scripture, time in prayer, and time in the assembly. Okay, and the world is aggressively going after that time in the assembly, and your time in the Scripture and your time in prayer. It's got all its efforts out there to pull you into its interest, and it's pretty good at it. It knows how to get your curiosity going, how to grab your attention. I mean, if you're going to increase your market share, what do you got to do? You got to grab more people's attention. That's just how it works. So the world's pretty good at that. And so the Christian then has to realize, unless he's aggressively pushing in the other direction, see, the world's going to run over the top of him. See, the world's going to take more and more market share of his time and his interest. And that's one of the real battles that we fight today in the church. Sometimes we can get people immersed, but they're not interested in attending assembly, not interested in making the commitment, the regular commitment necessary. My great-grandfather was Thomas John Wilson, and he would regard himself as a Christian. He was also a 33rd degree Mason, which obviously there's a disconnect in there, but Scottish rite, of course. But there's a little Presbyterian church up the road from the Wilson Ranch. He never missed. Never missed. Old time Presbyterian. So that's the way it was. It was a country that was structured around attendance at some sort of assembly on the first day of the week. Okay. Now, his wife, however, thought it was more important to spend her time fixing the Sunday dinner. So she never attended. And of course, that made my dad and my aunt, neither one. Well, my aunt, she attended the Presbyterian church here in Bozeman quite a bit. She was a 5th grade teacher in one of the middle schools, and I stayed with her one weekend when I first started coming down here from Great Falls to get the assembly off the ground. And I brought my harmonica along, and so I was downstairs, and I was playing the old Rugged Cross, and shall we gather at the river, and a couple. And so she came downstairs and she said, "My, those are simple tunes." Yeah, Grandma. I'm not going to be the kind of guy that gets on a harmonica, And then she says, "Isn't it interesting? Surely you don't believe there's a devil." Okay, no. I said, "Well, Grandma, or Aunt Jean, I believe the Bible, so yeah, there's a devil." But see, she's going the Presbyterian route. Interest, where our interest really is. What's important? See, being able to aggressively push back. That's why, to the extent that we can get involved in personal Bible studies, to the extent we can get involved in trying to reach the lost, helps us, because that's our pushback, so that the world's market share doesn't squeeze in on us. Now, it takes discipline to be able to do that. So much of the time, I think Miss Paula and I were having a brief discussion, for a few minutes, and talking about the workforce and the labor force. Okay, there's a percentage, that'll work hard, has goals, be disciplined, but there's always been a percentage of lazy guys. There's always been a percentage of guys that try to figure out how to game the system. Someone become thief. It's the development of the welfare state, though. People make a profession of gaming the system, and that greatly impacts the workforce. So you have an increasing percentage of those on the bottom end who don't want to do any work at all. Okay, so I remember one time a guy came through. He was looking for help, and I said, "Well, there's a place right here that's hiring right now." why don't you go in there? So he did. They, fired him after a couple days. Why'd they do that? It wouldn't work. You know, he wanted a job, but he didn't want to work. Okay. Now that impacts, what goes on in the church, and that impacts our ability to reach the lost, and it impacts our ability to make sure that we're expanding the Lord's market share in the world. See, that's we have to look at it if you use that terminology. That's what our job is. And it's our individual responsibility to try to figure out how to do that in our own personal lives. It takes some courage to do that. It takes ability to increase our people skills to figure out, okay, how can we get a conversation going? I caught something in Dear Abby. I read the obituaries, and I read Dear Abby to remind me what my job is. So somebody had written into Dear Abby, it was a guy, and he said, I'm a pretty outgoing person. He said, I've always been. He said, like to just engage in conversation with people. But he said, ever since COVID, he said, I'm having a hard time. People are on their phones. They don't want to look at you. They don't want to talk at you. They don't want to engage. And he said, am I the only one that's experiencing that? And she said, no. I mean, she listed some studies that showed that, yeah, that's an ongoing thing. Do you realize how that's impacting our ability to get those good conversations going? When you got the whole stuff with microaggressions and everything like that. Isn't it interesting that some LGBTQ plus individual can scream about the fact that their rights have been violated, but in the meantime, it's okay to trash Christians and Christianity. See? Even the modern Jew, you can't trash the modern Jew, unless you're Palestinian, of course. And you can't trash the Palestinians unless, you're, of course, Jewish. But the point is everybody can bash Christians. See, so going into the marketplace, we have to think in terms of, okay, how can I develop the people skills and the ways of opening conversations and seeing what we can do to drift it in the right direction. If we're not conscious of trying to do that in our life, the world's drive for market share is going to come and take ours away. You can't be like S.S. Kresge and sit in neutral, because the Walmart's going to take you out down the road. Same way in our personal lives, we can't be sitting neutral. We have to try to be increasingly aggressive, and an element to effort to try to seek and save the lost. So that's my encouragement today. It's important for us to kind of recognize the waters in which our ships sail, and pay attention to the winds and the currents so that we can navigate properly and to be tactful. So that, open it up for comments or thoughts or. Andrew.
So actually something that I was doing some research on in terms of the culture that's actually being shaped by the introduction to social media to younger people. What they're finding, especially in girls, is that like teenage girls and pre-teenage girls, is that there's this feeling of missing out and someone talking about them and them not knowing. And what I find really fascinating is this idea of when the world has all these things that seem so inviting and so interesting and so able to draw our attention, we feel like we're missing out if we don't have something that the world is offering. And really, that's the way that the world operates. Is it offers something that seems like it's giving you what you want and draws you in, and then you lose perhaps perspective on what's really important.
Yeah. Great comment. That's very much what's going on. And we have a situation where there's not enough people to fill all the jobs, right? So what that does is that makes it possible. You just got to try to hire somebody. It's not a lot of competition for jobs. So the result is you get people that have spent a lot of time on Facebook. They have never developed the social skills because they never interacted with real live people. And then, okay, now you're going to get hired as a retail clerk. Okay, it's going to be a pretty difficult transition there, right? But that's a real point. So great point. Another comment? Yeah.
I just recently got a new phone, and I went from a Samsung to an Apple, which has been quite a learning curve. But one of the things I like about my Apple phone is that every week I have it set up so that on Sunday morning during church it tells me if my screen time was up or down for that week. And then it breaks it down into what I'm spending my time in. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a good gauge because, like just 10 minutes ago, it said my screen time was up 13% last week. And then it gives me a breakdown of what I'm spending my time on. For me, that's good because I want to control my screen time, which includes whether I'm on my Bible app or, taking notes for Sunday evening class or whatever. So, but Apple recognized a long time ago that's market share.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a good point. Great point. I have an app that tells me how many times I went over 80 miles per hour last week, and how many times I engaged in hard braking. See, but I mean, they're tracking us, right?
I was just a little bit of a story back to the Walmart situation. As Walmart began to go into the grocery industry, we got pretty concerned about that and dug deep into it. One of the practices of Walmart, which really feeds to the bigger thing, Satan's behind all of it. Walmart gave classes to their employees on how to best collect from the government for benefits and of all nature, because they did not offer any kind of benefits to their employees. Makes it pretty hard for anybody to compete with them. By contrast, as Safeway was growing, the government was busy supporting unions, and Safeway and all other grocers ended up being unionized. Twofold. Choke one side and feed the other. And no surprise that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were on the board of directors for Walmart in Arkansas. Huh.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, little old Bentonville. Yeah. See, that's a great point. And see, because if you can use the government, see, that's how you develop monopolies. You use government. Government gives you an advantage and penalizes somebody else. I see that Albertson / Safeway trying to merge with Kroger so they can compete with Walmart. And, that's getting blocked because I wonder why that would be. But, so those are, when you have the regulatory agents running things, sooner or later it's going to favor monopoly. And that's why the Constitution prevented government from even getting into those things to start with. But within about 2 weeks after the Constitution was ratified, people forgot certain principles and been on that downhill slide ever since. Elliot?
Thanks. One thing that I was thinking of, particularly with Nick's comment, is time is a use it or lose it resource, and all of us have the same amount each day, and it's up to us how we choose to use it. And it's in Satan's best interest to engineer the world around us, engineer the pressures to suck up as much of our time as possible, to sponge up as much of our time as possible. And if we're not on guard against that, it's really easy to do that. Sometimes it'll be late at night, I'll have gone off of work and I'll be sitting on my bed and watching YouTube, and I have to remind myself, Elliot, get your Bible reading done, because otherwise, if I let that suck up all my time, it just doesn't happen. And that's one day that I could be moving forward. So time is an interesting thing, and we get our amount of it each day, and it's up to us to choose how to use it.
Yeah. Again, that's a great point. And any medium that appears both to the visual and the audio, is got a natural curiosity advantage because, your attention is grabbed in two different directions with it. And that's why it's so powerful. And, the Christian has to be aware of it. A number of years ago, we showed Francis Schaeffer's How Shall We Then Live, which is a pretty good series. And one of the things he did, and this is back, I think, in the 1980s, but one of the things he did was there was a scene that he put on there. And, the way the scene came across was something about some revolutionaries, that were, trying to take over someplace, bust a wall down or something like that. And, but he said, okay, that's how it looked if you were watching it on the screen. But he said if you knew what was behind it, you knew that there was a totally different story. And that's the thing about the visual media. The camera guys are very good at having you see what they want you to see. Most of the camera guys are men. And recently somebody was doing an experiment to see how the lady camera people do compared to what the men do. I haven't seen any results of that. I thought it'd be probably interesting as to how that's going to translate into what you see on there. But, YouTube, that's a big one, right? We get questions all the time. So the seven churches of Revelation, we're engaging in Passover, and so that Passover that the seven churches of Revelation engaged in became the modern Easter. I mean, the point is you can put anything on YouTube, okay? And you can make it look like there's all kinds of documentations and everything else like that, see? But, it grabs your attention, right, Elliot? I mean, pretty quick. And then, they got it set up so YouTube's going to show you a next one, right? I mean, it'll just come right up for you. And again, the scrolling. See the way they got the app set, so you scroll and it pulls you in, and all of a sudden 10 minutes are gone, 15 minutes are gone, half an hour is gone, and really, how productive was it? And so it takes discipline and takes a purpose in our lives, a very strong purpose, in order to try to be able to overcome that stuff. And that's where a lot of our challenge as Christians is, figuring out, okay, what's my purpose in the body of Christ? Where do I fit? What can I do? And that's going to be the key to be able to back off that other market share. Other thoughts or comments on any of this?
This last week I was hearing about a possible AI real estate agent where you don't have to actually pay the real estate agent those fees, where they kind of do everything for you. And I heard one of my friends say, basically this would put out, thousands of people out of jobs, and that's the problem with capitalism. And there's a lot of confusion about what capitalism is, what like free enterprise isn't even a term that's used anymore. Could you kind of clear some of that up? And this guy he's a conservative guy as well. So even conservative people are just very confused about economics.
Yeah. Well, let's go to John chapter 10. John chapter 10, starting in verse 7. John 10:7. So Jesus said to them again, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved, will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and might have it abundantly. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand not a shepherd, not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming, leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand, not concerned about the sheep. He said, I'm the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And what I wanted to call to your attention again is that Jesus used the principle of private ownership of property to lay a foundation for love. Okay? And so, the biblical economic system is private ownership of property. Also has to do with metal currency and based on the standard shekel of the sanctuary. And so it's a free enterprise system, and it's based on solid money, and it's also based on the principles of a republic, whereby the government is limited. Okay, and when you have that, you can have some prosperity. Now, so private ownership of property then is the key factor. So when we start talking about capitalism, okay, the key word is capital. Now, Satan always does everything he can to confuse terminology. Baptism, right? Okay, any important term he's going to confuse the meaning of, okay? So capital is anything that you have that you can use to make money with, okay? If you got 360 acres out here, that's your private ownership of property, and that's capital. And then you can buy, say, a sprinkler system or something like that, and some equipment. That's all capital goods. See, there's two types of goods. There's capital goods, and there's consumer goods. Consumer goods is what you use, that you consume them, right? Okay? And capital goods are what are used to produce consumer goods. So it just happens then there's two types of capitalism, and this is where the confusion comes in. There's monopolistic capitalism, and there's competitive. See, capitalism all by itself is a meaningless term, other than a general idea, okay? So you have to break it down into competitive capitalism, monopolistic capitalism. Monopolistic capitalism is where the control of capital goods is centralized, okay? And competitive capitalism is where the control of capital goods is distributed throughout the economy, a lot of private people having capital, okay? Now, we were just talking a little bit, what government does is it favors the move from competitive to monopolistic capitalism. Now, a classic example was John D. Rockefeller. Old John D. He got started in the oil industry. Okay, oil was discovered in 1859 in Titusville, Pennsylvania. The ability to pump it out of the ground, and so eventually, before very long, there's oil refineries along the Ohio River, and so John D. had one of those. Well, the railroad had already come into existence then, and the railroad is controlled by the ICC, I think, Interstate Commerce Commission. Okay, it's federal. Okay, see, and the fact that the federal government was involved in the railroads in the first place was a huge disaster. So what John D. was able to do through his control of the regulatory boards, he was able to charge his competitors. They had to pay extra to get their barrels of oil shipped by rail because that was the only way to ship it down to the river. And then that's where the refineries were. And then he got a rebate for every barrel that he shipped, right? Okay, now, if you really want some documentation to it, there's a book written called John D. Rockefeller. It was, I think, a guy named Silas Turner or something, 1903, okay? He wrote that, okay? But before long, because John D. is getting extra and it's costing these other guys more, he starts putting them out of business. He starts buying up every single oil refinery along the Ohio. That started out as Standard Oil of Ohio. Okay? But he got his monopoly through government, by control of the government. So it's monopolistic capitalism. You think John D. Rockefeller was a free enterprise, competitive, capitalistic guy? Monopolistic. So you can't confuse John D. Rockefeller with the guy that's trying to start a business in downtown Bozeman. Some guy's got a little manufacturing plant, you know. Used to talk about Marvin Bowling for a little bit. Marvin, in his backyard, he had it set up where he made all the grooming tables for Petco in the United States, okay? That was his backyard, right? Okay, that's the distribution of capital, competitive system. Now, the monopolistic system always wipes out freedom. See, because the further this goes, the more leverage it gets and the more ability it has to squeeze out the small competition. Good example, where all the mom and pop grocery stores gone. Gone. Do the big guys get tax breaks that the small guys don't have? Yes. Yeah. And then on top of that, they hire lawyers and tax accountants and everything else to make sure that, you know, here's a poor guy, you know, trying to get his business off the ground, and he's having a hard time getting his paperwork done, much less stay on top of all the legal stuff, see? See, that was one of the great things about early America. You didn't have all this. I mean, you just start up a business. You know, I was down at the bank the other day, and, you know, I had to go through a lot of hoops to get the Butte congregation get a bank account. And it took me about a year and a half to get that done. When I started the bank account for this congregation, 1972, I went down, you know, put my name on a signature card, opened the account, and, you know, got some counter checks until my checks came in. That's all it was. Okay? Let's see, now everything's regulated across the board. Businesses trying to get started. I remember talking to Mr. DiPaolo one time. Gary, you said something to the fact that if you had tried to start the Bagel Works in Bozeman, say even by maybe even by 2000, would have been very difficult, right?
$72,000 before they can even open the doors and give it to the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I mean, regulation. Who's that favor? Big guys or small guys? Big guys, see? So what you have is, so who's one of the primary owners of Smithfield Foods? Smithfield provides a lot of your meat products. What's that? Chinese. Yeah. Tyson Foods, who's one of the major owners of Tyson Foods? Chinese. Who opens all the big elevators in northern Montana? No. China. Grain elevators. Okay. See, now, are the guys in China in competition with the guys in Russia? In competition with the big corporations in the United States? No. This war in Gaza, that is not a war ultimately between Hamas and the modern Israelite state. That's a war on the American people. And you have to realize, that they're trying to split the American people up again into pro-Israel and anti-Israel factions, okay? See, the goal is the subjugation. The American people are the last major piece of resistance to the global New World Order. You have to be able to process what that's about so that you don't get pulled into things. And it's this versus this. What's that? Yeah.
I just said, without government, it can't be a monopoly.
Yeah, right. See, and same thing that Gary was talking about, the different regulations and requirements and stuff. How's a small person going to come in and have the capital to try to start something like that? And pay, say 10% interest. So again, how do we get in the position where interest rates are going to be like 7%, or how do we get there anyway? Government. Yeah. Elliot?
I don't know what the name of this effect is, but it's an effect I've noticed frequently among social and even sometimes religious circles, and it's this effect where the thing preventing something bad is blamed for the bad that exists. So competitive capitalism is oftentimes the scapegoat, the blamed factor for the state that this country is in right now. Well, no, it's not competitive capitalism's fault. It's the fact that we're limiting competitive capitalism. It's the fact that we're promoting socialism and monopolistic capitalism and practices. You see it in religion, where people blame the fact that America is a country based on moral values, on God, on respect for the Bible, and they blame the bad things that happen now on that. But it's actually a lack of that that's causing these bad things. So I don't know what the name of that effect is, but it's something I notice pretty frequently, and it's really interesting to see. It's terrible, but it's really interesting to see.
Yep. It's the effect. It's the Adam and Eve effect. Yep. The woman, the devil, okay, not my fault, right? So yeah, it all goes back to human nature, and Satan's able to take advantage of weaknesses of human nature in order to advance his agenda. That's why we as Christians have been called out of this world. Called out to a different lifestyle, a different set of values. We just have to be sure that the world's not impacting our viewpoint. Again, it's designed. I mean, let's put it this way: does Facebook have any control over what you might see and what you might not see? Does YouTube have any control over what you might see and what you might not see? Absolutely. See, so when they don't have to shift everybody, see, all they have to do is shift a segment. See, if they shift everybody, one step this way, I'm sorry, let me do it this way, because you're looking at me. Okay, shift it one step this way, okay? See, they increase their market share. They increase their market share by doing it. So we as Christians have to be aware of that, and again, pay attention to what's going on, understand biblical principles, and make sure we don't get pulled into pro this or pro that, because boy, that's right now, see, Fox News is pro-Israel, right? And MSNBC and those guys are all kind of pro-leftist, right? And see, they're getting you in the Pinterest movement. So you got to really pay attention. Mel?
When we first opened up the paint pot, and I don't know where it came into it, probably at the end of the first year on it, the state of Montana had a tax thing of taxing businesses 2% of their gross sales. 2% of their gross sales. Now, of all the years we operated the paint pot, okay, when we did make a profit, okay, the profit that we made was around 2% of our gross sales. That's down there where Safeway's operating at. You're that close to being broke,
Yeah.
literally. On it. Well, thank God some of the legislation we got together or whatever it is and knocked that tax out, on it. What we got to see about the taxes, but anyway, give you an example of the government getting involved in things, okay. Okay, another thing I wanted to bring up, okay, Bob Woodburn, okay, his ranch that they grow grain on, he can get together with 3 other ranches over there and sell their grain directly to China? No. No, you got to sell it through the Oregon Grain Growers Association, and they sell it to China. Okay?
Yeah. See,
Ask Bob if that's true.
Yeah. and it's a thing. Again, wipes out the small guy.
Yeah, there's a significant proposal now, and it will happen, to tax capital gains, and that's the end of our economy completely. Cannot survive without that.
Yeah, 44.6% is what's being proposed. See, and again, you got to understand the Biden administration is just issuing executive order after executive order after executive order. I mean, every business has to capture all emissions. Can't do it. Yeah. See, I mean, those are set up to just crush the American economy. So we have to pay attention to that. I mean, it takes it a little while before the trickle down effect hits, but it does. So, we really have to have our focus. Let's go to Matthew chapter 6. These aren't just nice words, they're much more than that. Matthew 6:24. See, it's going to come down to this. No one can serve 2 masters. You'll either hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. At some point, you got to figure out, okay, am I going to play the game the government wants me to play, or am I going to serve God? It'll come down to that. Make no mistake about it. For this reason, I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you'll eat or what you'll drink, nor for your body as to what you'll put on. Is not life more than food and the body than clothing? Do Christians actually worry about some of these things? I see it. Yep. See, God's saying, no. You got to put first things first. It says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? Who of you, by being worried, can add a single hour to his life? Why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon, all his glory, not even Solomon, all his glory, clothed himself like one of these. If God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Do not worry then, saying what we eat or what we drink or what we wear for clothing. For the Gentiles eagerly seek all those. Don't minimize that line. Okay. Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. Your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow cares for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. The reason for me bringing these things to your attention is to help us process where we need to set our priorities. If you're pouring money into something that's just not going to give you any return at all, the smart thing to do is to figure that out. I've sometimes worked with guys and they're working really hard in their business and they're doing some of the wrong things. And so the solution was to do double what they're doing, okay? And, so it was actually driving them deeper into the hole instead of getting out of it, because what they were doing was not putting their money, making it work where they needed to. And so, okay, ultimately, what's going to happen to Earth? It's going to burn. It's all going to burn, right? And so, what's not going to burn? Close it out here this morning. Let's turn to Hebrews. A couple passage out of Hebrews here. Focus. Okay, focus. What's important? What are we going to do with our time? What are we going to do with our perspective? What are we going to do with our finances? It has all to do with this. Hebrews chapter 12. I want to go there first. Hebrews 12:25. He says, "See to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if those did not escape when they refused him who warned on earth, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven." Doing a little presentation right now in Helena on Jesus being the prophet who speaks from heaven. See, Moses was the prophet who spoke from earth. Jesus is the prophet who speaks from heaven. See, and his voice shook the earth then, but now is promised, yet once more I'll shake not only the earth but also the heaven. This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let's show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, for our God's a consuming fire. Again, it's just helping us put the perspective on things. What's going to happen to everything on earth? See, what is it that can't be shaken? See, well, so since we receive the kingdom that can't be shaken, let's show gratitude. I mean, basically, if God wants something out of me, why would it be a problem for me to give it to him? If he wants me in the assembly about the Lord's table on the first day of the week, why wouldn't I give it to him? I mean, what's the issue? See, what could possibly be more important than that? Anything else is going to be taken. Gratitude, by which we may offer to God acceptable service. And it's called get to work, okay? And then back up to Hebrews 10. Talking to the church in Jerusalem, who began in the crucible, the fires of persecution coming from the hands of Saul of Tarsus. It says, remember, Hebrews 10:32. But remember former days when, after being enlightened, you endured a great conflict of sufferings, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated. For you showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted joyfully the seizure of your property, knowing that you have for yourselves a better possession and a lasting one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance. See, that's another key line there. You need of endurance, so that when you've done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. My righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have the faith to the preserving of the soul. The original quote had to do with the coming of the Babylonians. It's applied here directly to the coming of the Romans, but ultimately applies to the coming of Jesus Christ. So we get our instruction here how to handle these things. Okay, how joyful is it going to be to accept the seizure of your property? How about they come in here and say, this is a great facility. This is just going to become government offices. Just take it. Your home. See, I think we can fit a Hoffman home, I think we can fit 8 families in there. I think we'll just, give each of them about 300 square feet. You don't think that happens? I've been to places in St. Petersburg and Russia, that's exactly what they did. See, can we get to where we have the attitude and perspective, see, of the eternal things, so that if these things happen to us, see, they may not. See, but if we have the perspective where we can handle it, you see, everything else is going to work a lot better, isn't it? See, and that's where God's going with it. See, we got to really prepare ourselves scripturally, spiritually, mentally, endurance-wise for the worst. That way we'll do the very best, regardless of circumstance.